Our speaker is George Cates. He's from Native American Seed. He's a restoration specialist. And George started as an intern after graduating from Austin College in Sherman with a degree in environmental studies. He's involved in a variety of water conditioned restoration projects with Native American Seed, including production system and offsite harvest. And George has helped lead riparian restoration projects for San Antonio River Authority and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Other clients he's worked with include IBM, the HEB Foundation, and Texas Parks and Wildlife. So George, let me stop sharing and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so y'all heard that I graduated from Austin College in Sherman, Texas, and I actually grew up there and traveled many a time through Collin County on my way to soccer games and soccer practices in Plano and watched that whole thing over 15 20 years just explode into a mass of humanity. And it used to be a pleasant drive through fields of corn and so on and so forth, and now it's Buc-ee's and box houses, and there's used to be 2 lanes on Highway 75. I think there's probably 20 now. I don't know. But after college, I moved to Austin, and at college, I met my now wife, Emily, whose parents started Native American Seed. And we kicked around in Austin for a while she was working at the Sustainable Food Center, and I was doing some landscaping with a company that specialized in native plants and water features. And I had interned here at NAS during college and was just dissatisfied with digging trenches for really rich folks in Travis County so that they could have a grotto on their $1 million home, and thought, well, maybe I could put my energy into something a little more productive. So I came out here in 2007, at the end of 2007. Emily didn't come till 2009, so I was commuting back and forth. Anyway, since then, we've our company's grown thanks to the support from groups like NIPSOT and just the whole public interest in native plants and water conservation, a connection to a place, connection to wildlife, connection to past generations and future generations. So I'm pumped about my role here, being able to educate the public, to help people, to empower people. So that's why I like doing these talks. It's really about giving folks some tools to make the world a better place for the next generation. So with that said, let's go on. So, these biographies that we send y'all, they're always, they don't tell the whole story. So, I do everything I can out here. So one day it could be, changing gaskets on the irrigation system, or changing the motor oil in the lawnmower, or helping put a transmission in a combine. And we cycle through folks. People come and people go, and so you have to learn how to wear a bunch of different hats. And there for a while, about 3 or 4 years, I was needed to assist with the answering of telephone calls, because we maintain an 800 number, and it's our objective to have a human being for folks to talk to that are interested in native plants. And so this is a collection of like the questions that I had to answer over and over and over again every day for 3 or 4 years. And so if you're thinking about, using seeds, how many of y'all would be asking me these same questions? And so I got to thinking about it, like, man, I wish that that people would ask me these questions. They're a lot more fun to answer. So before you even think about going to throw seeds out, you want to think about, is the area ready for them? Have I done my diligence to prepare the site? So, there's a whole discussion to be had there about your site and what would be required to prepare it so that you're not wasteful with your seeds. Because that's the other thing is that native seeds are pretty rare. And I sure hate to see them go to waste. I want people to be successful because it's a lot of work to produce them. So which species should I plant? Well, what are the tools that you need? What's the information that you need to choose the right ones? And then once I've chosen them, how do I take care of them? Not necessarily how often do I need to mow. I mean, that's one aspect to it, but there's a much larger discussion that can be had. What kind of fertilizer? Well, turns out that native plants are all about soil health and plant communities and diversity and uh, how do you ensure that your soil is healthy? And instead of how much do I water, you got to think about how in a diverse ecosystem, so like the Blackland Prairie ecosystem, which is predominantly what Collin County is. The plant community, the historical plant community, would have been in excess of 450 species, and there's a lot of topography and micro habitats and seeps and limestone outcroppings and riparian areas and woodlands and those plants all have adapted to their niche. And so you have to be able to look at your place and understand what niches do you have and what species go in there. When do we get flowers? Wish people would ask me about the life cycles of specific native plants. That's a lot more interesting to me. And we planted a year ago and now it's just weeds. I thought the natives took everything out. I wish they would ask if I could explain how a native plant community is supposed to function. So in that light, for me, my father-in-law here, Bill, he grew up in El Paso, Dallas first, and then El Paso. And him and his dad and sisters would go camping in the Gila wilderness and you know, sleep on the ground and catch trout in the streams. And so one of his life philosophies is if you want to catch a trout, you got to think like a trout. Well, I grew up bass fishing. So for me, if I want to catch a bass, I got to think like a bass. If you want to catch a native plant community from a bag of seeds, you got to think like a native plant community. So this is the Llano River here in Junction. This is our source of life and livelihood as we irrigate our farm fields with our allotted water rights. And from time to time, they actually let me out of here so I can go fishing. And so that's me fishing. And you'll notice that I'm up against the bank there because in this river system, that's where the bass hang out. They don't hang out in the middle. So if you want to catch a bass, you got to go where the bass are and you got to throw something at them that they recognize as food or something that's trying to eat their eggs so that they'll get on your hook. So if you want to think like if you want to catch a native plant community, like let's say you want some verbenas in your landscape, well, you got to think like a verbena. So this here is a photo of that same plant up on our equipment yard, uh, blooming its head off in the middle of summer after a good rain. Uh, maybe 15 days ago or something. And on this particular day, it's 100 degrees and bone dry. And there it is living inside of a piece of aluminum uh, that's in excess of 150 degrees. And so it's an upland site that's up on our equipment yard where we keep our bits and pieces of irrigation pipe. And just all on its own, just as hot as it could possibly be. And it's surviving. So last year was exceptionally droughty for us, and we got one monsoon shower or something. So full sun, blazing hot. That's totally different than on the north side of your house where you have a giant oak tree and the air conditioner drips water on it all day. That would be a different plant. So if you want that one, then you have to have a site that is similar to one that uh, is this plant's natural habitat. So think about that. You want to think about kind of like what are the evolutionary, driving forces in Texas ecology? Well, in Sherman, it rains a lot and then it's a lot milder climate than it is out here in Kimball County. So this is where I'm at, is in Kimball County. And then Collin County is over here. I guess it's this one. That's Grayson. And so this was last year, 2024, August. And so
Hey, George,
yes.
uh, I can see you, but I am not seeing your slideshow at all.
Are you the only one or
John, we're
Is it-
not just fine. I think you must have minimized that part of your Zoom window. Look for little sideways arrows between the sections.
Yeah, we're seeing it fine, John.
okay, I'm not. Okay, thank you.
okay, so this right here, August 8th. So you saw on the frequently asked questions slide, when's the best time to plant? It depends, but when it's dry is a good time. That's one of my answers, is when it's dry, because it's hard to plant seeds in the mud. But if you understand the life cycle of some native species, like for example, the roadside wildflowers that we're all supposed to be enjoying this time of year, you'd know that they germinate after this period when the temperatures drop 10 degrees and you get a rain. That's so around this time is when we're prepping our farm fields and trying to get seeds in the ground so that they can take advantage of those first mild days in September when we have some moisture. But if you also understood that they're disturbance species and that they do best when the warm season vegetation has been disturbed in some way, and I'll show you a couple examples of what that would be, so that when the rain comes and the cool season starts, they can jump up and take advantage of that and kind of fill the gaps and heal the system together until the warm season shows up, when they die and turn ugly, and provide a little bit of shade for grasses that are trying to get going. So here, North Texas went through a dry stretch, and but nothing like out here in the desert. So abnormally dry just means it's been a little hot, but if it rains in September, then stays moist through the winter, then you have a really dynamite bluebonnet show or something on the side of Highway 75. But okay, but if it's a year like the year before that, where you're in just incredibly exceptional drought, all through bluebonnet country, and that pattern persists through the fall, you will not experience a germination event of bluebonnets. But so how does that species survive, from year to year, if it doesn't germinate and it doesn't make seeds that year? Well, the native plants have evolved a dormancy mechanism to cope with drought. Okay. And it's different for cool season species than it is for warm season species. And it's all about their survival strategies based on seed production. So, there are some that produce gobs and gobs and gobs of seeds, and every one of them will sprout on a half-inch rain. And then there's ones like bluebonnets that have an incredibly dense seed coat, and they'll remain dormant in the soil for 100 years or more, waiting for the right opportunity. And so what are the disturbances other than drought? Well, there's fire. So these plants all need to be fire adapted, because fire comes behind drought. This year in Kimball County, we've already had, like 8 wildfires, because we had rain last fall and the grass grew, and then they got really, 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 really dry. So, and it's so dry, we didn't even burn our grass fields this year. We just mowed them because we didn't, don't want to cause damage to someone else. So fire and bison were, primarily, they go hand in hand. So after a burn and it rains, then the bison come and graze the grass, and their hoof action disturbs the soil, and they plop fertilizer all over it. So if you're trying to put a natural plant community, a natural system into your landscape, and have it be reflective of the historical plant community, like you have to take on these roles that Mother Nature would have done previously. So you have to be the bison, you have to be the fire, you have to cycle the biomass, you have to provide the disturbance, you have to provide the selective pressures. And so, thinking about it holistically, it's more of like a commitment to a lifestyle than it is a one-time kind of thing. And I'm sure many of y'all know that, and that you're somewhere on the continuum of your native plant journey, and you figured out that it's not no maintenance, it just it's different than the mow, blow, and go of modern society. So some of the lesser known evolutionary selective stuff has to do with specialization. And so in a plant community as diverse as the Blackland Prairies, you're going to have a lot of like specialization, and you're going to have endemism and, things that are really particular to a certain amount of sunlight and a particular amount of moisture. There's all kinds of these really cool relationships between flora and fauna, where the plants and the animals, like, they specialize on each other. Then you have some generalists, like the milkweed genus, that so you have like the monarch butterfly that is specializing on it, that's using the toxins in its milky sap there to protect its young caterpillars, right? But this milkweed plant is a generalist. So you can see here, it's got a Pennsylvania bumblebee on it. It's covered in aphids. Okay. Aphids are food for, these are oleander aphids, but ladybugs and all kinds of other predatory insects. Like, this is a food source. So it's doing nectar, it's providing protein, and it's receiving, I don't know what benefit it gets from the monarch, maybe pollination, but it's giving up its leaf tissue. And so because these native milkweeds are such buggy plants, that's why they're so hard to find or convince a nurseryman to try and grow them, because they can't allow this to take place, in their nursery, because they'll have a plant with no leaves and no flowers on it or whatever, and that, they're losing money, and they're just, it's running a greenhouse. You don't want to allow this kind of stuff. So that they, traditionally they would just treat these plants with pesticides. They kill all the bugs. Well, that totally defeats the purpose of why you would want a milkweed in the first place. So sometimes it's better to just strike out on your own and try and propagate them yourself. But when you do, and you put them out in the landscape and they look like this, you got to just accept that that's okay, right? That's the plan. That's the purpose of that plan. So anyway, you get these cool relationships that drive evolution. Here, this is a colony of painted buntings. This bird travels up to central Texas and beyond, from like South America, right? And it comes up here to breed. So you got the green ones are the females, and these colored ones are the males. And this is a species of grass called Texas cupgrass. And it's nearly extincted out there in the natural world, because it's one of these ice cream grasses. So it's like super palatable to cattle, and just grazed to near extinction. It's a mid-height grass, so it's real susceptible to overgrazing. And but it's a cool thing because it's like a cherry tomato. So we harvest it here on the farm about 12 times a growing season, because it's always got seeds that are ripe, seeds that are forming, and seeds that have pollen on them. But this is perfect for these birds. So they come and they look for mid-height grasses that have this same characteristic. That they're indeterminate, they're constantly shedding seed so that they can make it through a breeding season and have the resources they need to rear young. So in between catching grasshoppers and stuff on this grass and carrying them back to their nest, they'll feed on the seeds, and they're kind of like a crop pest almost to us. But that's beneficial to the grass too, because they don't get every one, and they'll carry them off, and go sit on the fence wire and chew on a seed stalk and drop seeds that this plant could take advantage of, being of the seed dispersal that this little guy is providing. So if you have a diverse community, some of our seed mixes will have 70-75 species in them. It's not the same as 450, but there's a lot of opportunity to stop and smell the roses, so to speak, and you can watch this stuff happen. You get a decent planting in the first year. As soon as the stuff starts to flower, it's just full of life. It's unbelievable. It's like, if you build it, they will come. I'm sure y'all have done the same thing. You bring a mist flower home from the plant sale that's got blooms on it, you put it out in the yard, and 40 minutes later there's a butterfly on it, right? So this is my mom's yard up in North Texas, in Sherman. So the other thing is the temperate climate. So we have down here in Junction, we have 2 seasons. Y'all might from time to time get 4. Warm season and cool season here. Y'all have spring, summer, winter, and fall. But plants have to be able to cope with that, right? So you have warm season and cool season plants. And the warm season plants, their strategy is to, do their seed production at the end of the growing season, and then all that tissue will promptly die back. And so you're left with this biomass of, prairie material that historically would have been burned off in the spring with either lightning, or would have been lit on fire by tribes of Native Americans. And then the bison would promptly, graze in the summers, and then you'd get, some summer rain, and things would dry out a bit, and then the bison would wallow and plow, and then they'd go on somewhere else, and then it'd rain in September, and the wildflowers would sprout, and the whole cycle would start over. So this is springtime and a new planting, and here's, it's actually the end of spring, so it's like June, and you can see there's no grass, and it doesn't look anything like this, right? So this is around the exterior. This is a much better established prairie that has much taller grasses in it. And so as a planting evolves, these tend to give way to those warm season grasses, especially like in the 3rd and 4th and 5th year. And without some kind of disturbance, you would just expect the grass to kind of take over. So anyway, we all would love our, native planting to look like that. And I'm going to try and give you some food for thought on how to get there. And I'm hoping to leave enough time at the end for questions, if you have any. This is all native buffalo grass with some, kind of deserty bear grass and yuccas and stuff. This is Hill Country Village, San Antonio. And then you have along the edges and outskirts, the remnants of some prairie vegetation from the year previous. So a lot of times it's common in our neck of the woods, Austin, San Antonio, that people are going more and more native, but they're still not all the way there, so they'll have their indigo spires and, you know, fruit trees and other things in their Mexican asters or whatever. But, it's America, it's a free country, you do what you want. So y'all know how to screenshot, you might want to screenshot this one. So these are basically like steps. So we're going to go through what each of these means. So basically, where's a good fit? Go look at the land that you go look at the place that you've selected and pay attention to what it's trying to tell you about it. And this one's really important. Weed vectors. So in an urban environment, every yard on the block is a noxious weed vector, right? The lawnmower, if you borrow the neighbor's lawnmower, that's a weed vector. You're going to get weed seeds come in on that lawnmower. Your dog, it's going to go somewhere and get burr clover, roll in burr clover and bring that into your yard, and even your own yard, you might have Bermuda grass, and we do a garden, and we used to do one in Austin, and there was Bermuda grass around, man, and you get Bermuda grass anywhere near your garden, forget about it. Well, it's the same thing with your native planting. So you want to be aware of, like, which way is the prevailing wind blowing, and then what's in that pasture over there. Is it full of thistles and it's to the south of me, and those thistle seeds are going to blow all in your yard. You need to be aware of that, and pick some species that can tolerate that. So species selection. So these facts about your place are going to determine what plants will do well there. But we take it a step further, and we want to go to look at the historical plant community. So we want to help people restore the earth. We want to put it back. We want to put the plants back that are supposed to be there. So, I don't want to pick on anybody, but like a pet peeve of mine is this, what do they call this stuff? This Mexican feather grass, right? That you go to any nursery and you can buy a bunch of it, and it says it's a native plant. But if you really dig into it, it's native to one county in West Texas, up in the mountains, And so it's been taken, to other places. Like I saw it in a landscape in some picture I was looking at that was in France, right? And I saw it in some landscape in Australia where it had got out of hand, Well, it does the same thing when you bring it to Central Texas or East Texas. It's too wet and it goes crazy. So, paying close attention to the historical plant community is just an extra step to ensure that you're going to get the right material. And in the last few years, this citizen science has really come on. It used to be we'd have to go down to the cemetery or, down a back road or along the railroad tracks or to find some place that had never been plowed up, right? And then you could take stock of what the historical plant community was. And you even use those plants as a resource to multiply those and so on and so forth. Now, with everybody's carrying a cell phone in their pocket, the observations on iNaturalist, I'm going to show it to you, are just incredible. Like, you want to go find somewhere to collect a specific seeds of a specific species, man, you can go on iNaturalist. It'll show you every observation in the whole state, that somebody's made of that plant. And then you can go through those observations and see if they're correct or not or whatever. And I've done it. You go by where someone had said, okay, there's some Engelmann daisy here, and I'm passing by. I was like, oh, I'll go check that out, and there it is. So. And then having a good design. So, when we're doing landscapes, design is kind of important because, you know, some folks live with HOAs, some people have a lot of guests, and some people have, nosy neighbors. And what we don't want is for native plantings to look unintentional and then get chock full of Johnson grass and beggar's lice and all this other stuff that makes it just really unsightly, because it's very hard to spread the message of why you should do this to people who have no clue about what native plants are if it doesn't look good. You want it to look good. And so design is an important component, but also you can lose it in the design. You can design without having taken all this other stuff into account, and set the thing up for a failure right out the gate. So once you got your design and your goals and objectives, now it's time to begin preparation. And once the preparation's complete, then there's the installation. And then as that installation grows, it's establishing. And then for perpetuity, there's the maintenance. And so you can see this weed management is all over the place, right? So this is the biggest roadblock to ecological restoration. And if you haven't done it and run into this, you might not think it's that big a deal, but trust me, if you're paying attention, you're going to notice. So anyway, pick a site, right? Well, nobody's, home looks like this, but you guys get asked to, consult and volunteer with institutions and stuff. So you might run into places like this. So this is a A&M campus in Collin. And, they have a real formal style of architecture and a real, the Aggies are pretty formal. And so there's their formal entryway, the dean's office is somewhere up here, and, seeing 6-foot high grass might not be that right up front, might not be a good place. But you see this trail system. This is meant to be an amenity so that when people are stressed out from staring at books all day, they can just go out and jog, or walk. So along this trail system was selected as the site for diverse native planting, and people absolutely love it. So anyway, pick a good spot. And here's kind of some continuums to think about. There are some plants that don't care about this, and there are other ones that care very much. So, we try and do a decent job of publishing everything that we know about the things that we're offering. And so our catalog or website is a good place to go get some of that information. For example, like bluebonnets, they like to grow on south-facing slopes that are well drained. So, north-facing slope under an oak tree, you might want to pick something else. But a plant like horse herb, for example, it'll grow under an oak tree on a north-facing slope, or it'll grow on a south-facing slope out in the blazing sun. So you just need to understand that these are kinds of the things that are important to plants, as well as the soil type. So some are adapted to sandy soils and others are adapted to clay. And other ones don't care. So you just want to be sure that you're paying attention to that. So, here's a piece of land. What is it trying to tell you? This is on the Balcones Escarpment outside of Austin, Bee Caves area. And you see it's real shallow, thin caliche soil, so these are very drought hardy, mid-height grasses with a lot of gaps in between that, should fill up with wildflowers, right? But these are all native grasses, and So what you would not want to do is, make a plan to destroy all that vegetation to try and grow native plants because they're already all growing there. What you want to do is figure out which components of the historical plant community are missing and add those back. Now, if it's a field of old world bluestem, KR bluestem, that's a different story. So you just want to see what the land is telling you, and pay attention. So anyway, here's another item to screenshot. So picking species, I'm going to show y'all all these tools. This is going to be kind of interesting. So we'll start here with this web soil survey. So the USDA NRCS was born out of the Soil Conservation Service, and so it folded together soil conservation science with agriculture, and as a mechanism for the distribution of funds called the Farm Bill. And this particular component, the web soil survey stuff that came out of that, is about as valuable a thing as we could have done as a society, along with the National Weather Service, in our opinion. And would hope that, those aren't departments that we will close forever. The soil surveys, they came from the funding of the highways. So when we're going to build, because it's after the war, and we found out the Germans had these autobahns, and we're like, well, geez, we need that. Well, we took some advice and said, well, we should map our soils out, figure out, so we're not building in swamps, and we need to build our roads in the right place. And plus, if we ever have to drive tanks around, we need to know what they can drive on and what they can't. So we mapped all the soils. Start a new session. So all those soil maps then were folded up into the digital age, into this program, Web Soil Survey. And this is a browser-based program where you can get all kinds of information about soils and then find this thing called the ecological site description. But this is a very clunky interface, and I use the soils data just every day. So if you don't want to go download all the rest of the stuff I'm going to show you, this is a place where you can actually go map your property, and you can get some pretty, high resolution detail. Even if you live in a place like this, you can still figure out what the soil type is and all that. So anyway, all the data that's in here has been loaded up into by UC Davis. They have some of these apps or whatever. This one here, Soil Web Earth, allows you to take all of that soils data and use it in a program called Google Earth Pro. Okay. And so this one here is like, man, I use this all the time. So here we are, Collin County, right? And let's just say, this is your house. Okay. And you're like, okay, well, I have a pretty large lot. I'd really like to do something really interesting, native planting back here, So first you go out and figure out, is this a hay meadow that was planted with Bermuda grass? And yes, okay. So I got to figure out a plan to get that out of there. But what are the plants that I want to try and grow there? Well, here's your soil type. And it's usually what they call a series. So inside of this polygon, this number 33, you can see it stretches across, a lot of area. There's going to be different soil types, right? There's going to be 58% of this fairly, and 36% of this Houston black, and 6% of unnamed, which usually is like an outcropping or something, But anyway, you can see they both have this same thing right here where it says Northern Blackland, and you think to yourself, well, what is that? That's a hot link And what this does is it says, click here for more information on this ESD. So ESD is an ecological site description. So this describes the ecology of that particular site, that particular soil, and that particular geographic location. So I'm going to show you what one of those looks like now. So for the ecological site, Northern Blackland, so that's like as if I click that hot link, right? And so you can see this data is housed at New Mexico State, but you get one of these. Okay, you know, like what's the thrill here? Well, it shows you a bunch of associated sites, so similar sites, things that you'll often find together. You can look at the physiographic features, the climate features. When do you get your precipitation? What's the temps like? You know, so this can be some relatively useful information. It's like, oh, how do I install a native landscape without an irrigation system? Well, it says here that the characteristic high range for precipitation is 2.6 to 6.7 inches in May. You know, so if you had to bank on just rainfall alone, like there's a pretty good window to be targeting for planting. And again, over here in September and October. See, this is when the wildflowers sprout. So there's some really cool data here. Kind of what the features of the soil is, so you can, you know, get your soil pH and all that stuff. So some plants, you know, they have pH requirements that won't let them live in blackland prairies. But for me and my work, this section here called ecological dynamics is about the most valuable thing. If you want to understand the ecology of a plant community and your particular place on the planet, this is where you want to go. So it shows you the states. So this is the historical state, is that it was a tall grass prairie, and then another state that they've identified is shrubland, and then converted. And then these arrows indicate the pathways by which that happened. So these are land management strategies to convert from tall grass to shrubland to converted and back. So anyway, you know, it's full of all kinds of information about those states then, how much forage production, you know, and a lot of this is really focused on the agricultural side of things. But for me, what's really interesting is if you go all the way to the end of this particular tab, look what they give you. So we use this information when we construct our seed mixes, you know, so our Blackland Prairie Mix, if you go pull up our website and put in Blackland Prairie Mix, if we can produce it, if we can find it, and it's on this list, it's going to be in the Blackland Prairie Mix. So there you go. There's some, you know, your taxpayer dollars have produced this information for you. But like I said, a prairie could be, you know, 10 times this diverse. And so what about the rest of the species that aren't showing up on that list? Well, this is where the citizen science stuff comes in. So you can go here, right? iNaturalist, you click the map, and then you zoom into your area and you set your map wherever you want it. So there's like McKinney, and we can go up and we can do Howe and Whitewright and Gunner and all that. Okay. And you come up here and you type plants, but you know, you can also type flowering plants. You can type trees, you can type grasses, you can type an individual species. So like if we wanted to see, for example, bluebonnets. So there's lupins. You can also type in Latin names. So look, in this square, only 2 people have made sightings of bluebonnets. So there's one. On Luella Road. So you can zoom in and you can see that people have said, yes, that is what that is. I suggest that that's what that is. But if you want a general understanding of the plant community, you just type in plants. So looky here. Now you can go over here and you can see all of the plants that people have identified. And this will give you a good idea of what will grow in your neck of the woods. You know, another thing you can do here too is like, okay, you want to know about Virginia wild rye. You want to see where that was. You can think you can do this. I think you can actually load up, yeah, satellite. So Virginia wild rye is that observation. So you can zoom in and you can say, oh, look, it's totally under a tree. It's in the shade, right? Well, what else did they observe over there? That's just like my place, you know? Chickweed. So cedar elms and Virginia wild rye grow in the same place. So you can learn a lot of stuff in a really quick period of time. So you can combine soils data and citizen science data and come up with just a dynamite plant list. But if you're not a geek like me and you just want a little bit of help, you can go to our website. Phone numbers here at the bottom. You can call and talk to a human being. But we also have this nifty little doodad on our website where you can say, oh, look, Blackland Prairie, let's go. Okay. So I live in the Blackland Prairie. My yard is full sun, it's clay, medium, and I'm interested in pollinators. And I'm looking for fall nectar plants for whatever criteria. And so look, now it gives you some recommendations of what plants meet those criteria. And if you want, you can click all the way through to the end and add to cart or whatever, you know. So there's also this database that's really good. So this is the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and it has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of native plants. You can search by common name or scientific name, or you can choose a family to go through. And then it'll give you some information about each of the species. Like, for example, what kind of soil it'll grow on. And then at the bottom, it'll have some other links. And one of the links it'll have is another plant database, which is the USDA plant database, which will have distribution maps. I mean, it's just, there's an endless amount of information out there if you just have somebody point you in the right direction. So back to the show. Screenshot that if you're interested in chasing any of that down. So let's play from current slide. So we work on a lot of projects that have architects doing drawings and stuff. And this is the one I was actually at today. I was in Odessa. I started my day in Odessa and got windblown all the way back to Junction. And so you can put an incredible amount of thought into how a landscape is designed, or, you know, you can just not. And this kind of stuff is fun for us because this is how you use a landscape to engage people, to bring people outdoors, to make outdoor living spaces that people can enjoy, you know. So they have to flow and take people's goals and objectives into consideration, and just a lot of forethought goes a long way. So, for example, here, if your goal and objective is to establish a prairie, but have a walking trail through it, probably not a good idea to put down Bermuda grass sod, months in advance of doing a prairie planting. That's designing counter to your goals and objectives. So don't do that. Because what happens, this is what happens. This is what I'm talking about. So I can almost guarantee you this was 2015 or something. If I went back to look at this project now, there wouldn't be any wildflowers there. There wouldn't be any native anything. It'd be Bermuda grass right to the concrete. And this is somebody's genius idea of how to delineate between a native bed and Bermuda lawn is to use a weed eater. So, that's poor design is what that is. But see, this is what happens. You get, Johnson grass and Brazilian vervain. This is sugar land, so it'd be a little bit different than what you get up in North Texas. But North Texas, you'd still get Johnson grass, you get Bermuda grass, giant ragweed, all this other stuff. And because that's a failure. So people look at that and say, well, why would anybody want to plant native plants? So. And it's poor black-eyed Susans are doing everything they can, but it's just not enough. They can't compete with these invasive exotic species. Okay, and then here's also designing to fail and planning to fail. So here, this is in the Hill Country Junction. The idea here was we're going to seed sun turf, buffalo grass, and blue grama. But we want to be sure that, we've made a good seed bed for it. So let's just take this caliche subgrade and then put 4 inches of really coarse compost on it. And we're going to seed on top of that without any kind of soil protection, soil armor, erosion control. And, plant a bunch of trees. So even if it did it'd get shaded out in the first, 6 years or 7 years. So it's just, the design elements are all wrong. We would address that by incorporating that compost into that caliche and mix that together so that you'd have a real live seed bed. And then we'd broadcast seed on it, pack it firm with a good heavy roller, and then roll out erosion blankets on top of that after we seeded so that the seeds could have a good root zone. So what's going to happen here is, like, even if the buffalo grass, which has roots that go 15 feet in the ground, if it were to sprout, it would be like growing it in a 4-inch pot because it hit that hard scraped limestone. It's not even caliche. That's a limestone shelf, So it's like they just created a flower pot. And so this is the kind of stuff that happens. You can see here where the bulldozers didn't mess with it. It's fine. And then here where they scraped it off and made a new roadbed or whatever, you can't, you're not going to grow anything there. Nothing's going to grow on that limestone until it's set out in the environment for 1 million years, like this stuff here has, So in the hill country, there's a lot of very sensitive areas and, shallow soils and low rainfall, high temperatures, low humidity. It's very, very different than North Texas. Here, this is San Antonio River, that they had a situation like this, and this was their solution to fix it. So it's like the Native Americans said when they came by and saw that folks were plowing the prairie up and told them, hey, that's the wrong side is up. You got the wrong side up. Well, here they took erosion blankets. That's what this green material is. And they put it on top of that subgrade and then blew a mixture of compost and seeds on top of it and tried to hold it together with these cocoa core logs. And the river came up 15 feet and said, no, not a chance, But this technique worked in a greenhouse where they had misters on it, and it was not on a 45-degree slope in a river bed. So the design here is where they lost it. So anyway, once you got a good design together and you feel confident, now you got to implement it. You got to put your plan into action. So this project started in 2019 was our initial site visit to this place, and it's covered in Bermuda grass, and come to find out a whole bunch of other things. So they were constructing a new house, and it was going to take 2 or 3 years to build it. COVID happened, so it took a little longer. So the owners were like, yes, we want a wholly native landscape when it's all said and done. And if you think you need to get started now, then go right ahead. So this is Bermuda grass, heavily thatched, sub-irrigated from the pond. And you can see like there's just nowhere for native seeds to grow. So we treated it with herbicide, and there's different ways to go about it at a smaller scale, but at this scale, it's just, So I carry a license. I'm very, very cautious and selective of the types of chemicals that I use, and I'm fully aware of what their impacts are and will be. And we tend to use things that don't persist in the environment for as short a time as possible, that are mainly focused on actively growing vegetation. And then when we can use a selective type application, we'll do that. So in this instance, it took, multiple growing seasons to get the Bermuda out. And then we had, this is all brome grass. So rescue grass, some people will call it cheatgrass. Some people will call it as the bromus genus. This is people don't talk about this. This is like the bastard cabbage of grasses. It just snuffs out wildflowers. It snuffs out native grasses, and So anyway, no one's living at this property at the time, and they're doing construction, tearing it up, and so we're just working the seed bank is what we're doing now. We're mining all this stuff out of the seed bank. So, this is an annual plant. So if you can stop it from reproducing, then next year the seeds that sprout will have come from the seed bank, which means that there's fewer in the seed bank. And so the more that we clean the seed bank, the better the result is when we go and put in our native seeds. And so what happens if you don't do that? A lot of times, people think, oh, well, I'll just plow it, or just scrape the top off. I'll just scrape the soil off, and then I'll go stockpile the soil and then bring it back and spread it out. Or how about I just till? I'll just till that Bermuda grass. That'll kill it, won't it? And so, yeah, sure, you wind up with what looks like a clean seed bed, but in this instance, all of that root mass got chopped into little bitty bits and then distributed across the site. And then this is capped with hydromulch and watered irregularly so that the mulch would dry out. That had the seeds incorporated in it with a bunch of tackifier. They couldn't sprout and grow through that. But the rhizome Bermuda grass underneath just thought it was the bee's knees. And there you go. It's like no native grass is sprouting after 4 weeks. No native broadleaves are sprouting after 4 weeks, but after 4 weeks from seeding, there's Bermuda grass, and this is nut grass. So those little nutlets, they get spread around too. So before you even break ground, you need to consider, what am I doing with this non-native vegetation and non-native seed bank? So there's solarization is another method. You can do like a cropping regime for 2 or 3 or 4 years where you just plow and plant cover crops. So trying to get it organically, but things like Johnson grass and Bermuda grass, you can't let up, And so what happens if you don't do that? Well, then you wind up with this recombinant planting that, so here you have big blue stem, right? This is big blue stem, and it cannot outcompete Bermuda grass. And so you have a prairie planting. It's supposed to be a demonstration garden at an institution of higher learning where you're a degreed person from, and you can't even get them to make a prairie right, you know? So site prep can be more than just the weeds. Like a lot of times, you know, this is a condition that a lot of folks find themselves in. It's like, well, I sure would like to plant some seeds out there, you know, and aren't those leaves good for that? And the answer is no. Leaves are full of tannic acid, you know, y'all drink iced tea. Well, just think about it, you know, it's kind of an acidic drink. Well, oak trees do this so that only their acorns will sprout. They don't, so they're very suppressive to other species growing from seed underneath them. And so, you know, you'll have to do a little bit of site prep, you know, break those suckers up or blow them off, expose the soil. You can amend with some compost teas and maybe a dressing in compost, try and get microbes to eat the rest of those chemicals that are going to stop your desired species from sprouting. It's called allelopathy, and it's chemical warfare is basically what it is. So this is preparing a seed bed. So this is blackland clay in North Texas, and you can see all these strings and stuff in the soil. That's all dead Bermuda grass that had been treated for 2 years where it was growing out in the sun, and these other areas were free of it, so they were seeded the spring before. And you can see the one lonely Johnson grass over there that we had to take that out. But we didn't till this until we were sure that this Bermuda grass was dead. And you rake it smooth. If you're doing a lawn, this is kind of critical. Like if you want to go play croquet or walk barefoot, you want to be sure there's no broken glass and all that. But what this also does is it pulls away dirt clods so that your seeds don't wash underneath those. It levels it out, you know, makes a good seed bed. This is the time to amend it if you want. So if you want to talk about soil health, you know, we just are big proponents of good organic compost that you know the origin of all the materials in it. So you don't want manure from cows that have been eating hay that's got picloram and dicamba in it. You know, you want to use compost from your yard that you know what you put in it if you can help it, or if you know a good reputable source of organic compost that has it tested for all kinds of different things. And it's been gotten plenty hot so that it's cooked the weed seeds in there, you know, bringing in soil and bringing in compost like this. You can run the risk of contaminating your planting site. So here we are, August 2021. So that project started in 2019. We didn't put a seed down until 2021. So depending, the site prep can take a long time, is basically the point. So this is what it looks like when you broadcast the seeds, like you're feeding the chickens. This is an excessively heavy seeding rate. So like if this was a square foot, there would, you know, be 800 seeds in this square foot. Most of our seed mixes are designed to give you like from 60 to 200 seeds a square foot. That's all that you need. And you can see how diverse mixes work. You know, you got your milkweeds, your side oats, Indian grass, cane blue stem, buffalo grass, purple coneflower, American basket flower, plains bristlegrass, wine cups. And then you'll just repeat the raking process to incorporate these seeds into the soil. So the rule of thumb basically is that you don't want any of one of these seeds to be more than twice its width deep. So even if the dirt is only touching 3 sides of the seed, that's fine. And in general, 3/8 of an inch is what we recommend. In heavy clays, that you don't want to go any deeper than that. In really deep sand, you can get away with planting them deeper. It's actually recommended to put them a little deeper. Now we use these erosion control blankets especially on sloped areas. This is just wood fiber, Curlex wood fiber, net free. And they stop erosion, but they also shade and cool the soil so you can establish plants in the heat of summer. And they retain water. And they're loose mesh so plants can grow through them. So it's way different than hydro mulch. So and they increase your water efficiency fourfold. So people like instant gratification. So, it's okay to do seeds and live plants. That's perfectly fine. You just put your seeds in your blankets out first, and then you just cut holes in the blankets and dig your hole for your potted plant and stick it in there. So just to show you how effective these things are, this lawn was installed in July. 100 degrees. So after 1 week, and all we're doing is running these cheesy Gilmore sprinklers 4 times a day for like 8 minutes. And after a week, we got germination. This is after 16 days. So look how incredibly fast that grass grows. And that's because it's a warm season grass that is from a place that is all about the monsoon rains in the summer. So it, like 7 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches might be the average annual precipitation, but 8 of it comes in the summer. And so these plants are primed, and, they want the heat and they want the water to get going. So if you think about this, if you planted these in February in North Texas, they won't sprout, So they're in 35 days. Anyway, so that, let's talk about the water. So y'all notice on this previous stuff. So we're growing a short grass and we have these short little heads, but you see they're angled up. And so we can carry water over a larger distance, big radius, right? But as the plants grow taller, look, the sprinklers disappear. And if we were growing prairie grass, big blue stem and all that stuff, the sprinklers would not be functional. They'd do like this. And so what happens is all of the water, falls within 6 feet of the sprinkler head when the system is designed to throw it, 25, 30 feet out. So the water infrastructure is important. And if you don't do it right, then you wind up with an uneven distribution of water. And a lot of times, people that don't know what they're doing, they're like, well, we just got to give it more water. We just got to give it more water because it's dry over there. Well, they don't even understand that the water infrastructure can't put the water there. So they wind up drowning native plants. Or they're just, the pressure is wrong and the sprinkler head is wrong. There's all kinds of ways to do it wrong on the infrastructure side. But like, let's say your infrastructure is fine. Here, this is a clay soil. This is that Collin project again. And what's going on here is that these folks don't understand the seasonality of the seed mix that they put out, right? So they're trying to get erosion control from warm season grass in January. And they're like, the grass isn't growing, George. We've been watering it, but it just won't grow. Well, they had so over irrigated it that they turned the wildflowers chlorotic, like they're drowning them to death. So much so that they're growing algae. So look, if you ever see native wildflowers and they're this color, you need to, you're overwatering them. That's the problem. There's a standing cypress. That's a desert plant, it doesn't. It's an Indian blanket, Coreopsis, verbena, they're all sick, but there's the native grass. But look what doesn't care though. look what is just fine. Look what is so happy about it is the bastard cabbage. Says, yes, thank you, please. So you can overwater native plants pretty easy, but can you also underwater them? Well, so here's an interesting thing. This was buffalo grass that was installed via sod. And it was installed probably 20 months before this photograph was taken. And the way that the specifications were on this project is that, you know, this was the staging area for all of the construction equipment to build a rather large construction project. So they had all their materials here. They drove on it wet for 20 months before they did anything to it. And then they just top dressed it with some good rich soil and then put the sod down and turn the sprinklers on. So, you know, I showed up and was like, you know, y'all shouldn't have to be watering it this much. By now, it should be established. So they took my recommendation, cut the water off. 2 weeks later, they sent me this picture and they said, I think you were wrong, you know. And I was like, that's interesting. I wonder what's going on there. So I looked a little closer and I said, aha, now I see it. And so I went and dug through my photo archives of the project. And so this is what I had seen in the photos that they sent me, is these lines of green, you know, just that's not natural, you know, that's a human induced condition. Nature doesn't work in lines like that. So I dug through the photo archive, and sure enough, in that same area, I had taken photos of these trenches for the irrigation lines. And so look at this. You can see this hard compacted marl caliche mix underneath the dirt, and all that's been compacted down. And the only place where it had been worked over and made loose to make a proper root zone so that the buffalo grass could establish deeper roots is in these channels where the irrigation pipes were meant to go. And so that's why you have these lines of green. So I was correct that it should be well enough established, but as the underlying condition across the whole site where they had done all this compaction, that they were having issues. You can see back here where they weren't driving stuff around, they didn't have that problem. So anyway, what do you do with heavily compacted clay? Well, you got to be the buffalo, you know. So that's one trick that we use, is to fracture compacted soils. And at that time, you can add in your compost or your nutrient, or, you know, your mycorrhizal fungi, your expanded shale, whatever soil amendment you're trying to utilize. This is the time to put it together. So anyway, so once you've addressed all that and you got your install done, now these things have to grow in. And so you want to be sure that you understand what it is that they need and what they don't need, and that you're there to take action as required, and that you know, a stitch in time saves nine, and that you don't love these things to death. And that's generally what people do to native plants, is they love them to death. So here, this is establishing native trail mix, and you have these wispy pieces of grass. This is all native grass that was seeded in the fall and promptly went dormant, but it's mixed with this really aggressive burr clover, and called armadillo burr clover, and bastard cabbage. And so those two species are suppressing the growth of the native wildflowers. And you know, you can see here on this little grass seedling, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 15 blades. So that's a fully tillered grass is what we would call that. But look at the root growth on that sucker, right? So whatever you see above ground is not anything like what you see, what you don't see, what's going on below ground is pretty interesting too. So basically warm season native plants are slow growing, and this is the process is that they have to develop these root systems before, and once those are established, then they'll begin to put on growth above ground. So if you have conditions that prevent these little blades from gathering sunlight, i.e. weed pressure, from Bermuda grass or whatever else, then they can't ever, do enough photosynthesis to grow the root systems that they need. So it's really about buying this window of opportunity for the first, second, and third year for these plants to establish. So anyway, here, we got the call that our seed mix wasn't it wasn't meeting the goals and objectives or the expectations, they're suffering erosion and it's not filling in. Again, you can see the sheen on the soil from it being overwatered. The erosion. So they were relying on this warm season grass to give them erosion control, but they seeded it at the end of the warm season, so they just didn't quite get what was, the process. So back to this project, finally the following spring, you get the early successional wildflowers. So, this site transitioning to April should look like this if treated properly. But then by March, if it wasn't treated properly, then what? So the stitch in time, if the weeds weren't taken out, well, then by March they look like this. So, this stuff here is that really aggressive burr clover. And you can see the wildflowers are still not looking right. So the site's being overwatered. So the more water you put out, the more weeds you'll get. These plants love fertilizer. The native plants, not so much. But there's still time to take action if you just know what to do. So here, this is pasture cabbage, and it's not an issue. There's no seeds on it. If you get it out now, then everything that's underneath it will have a chance to thrive. You got to go rescue your paintbrushes from this burr clover. And so sometimes in the establishment phase of things, it looks like this. You got to go do the work. Now, it would have been a lot easier had we been able to have access to the site and hoe it when those plants were 4 inches tall instead of 4 feet. Generally, when we're working in a establishment phase, anytime we make a disturbance in the landscape, we're going to want to go ahead and still reapply seed. So there's all the biomass that we hoed out of there all the way down. And so here it is at the end of April. And there it is in June after they turn the sprinklers off and let nature do its thing. But by July, that stuff burns up. And now what do? That's a lot of work. To be the buffalo. So, a lot of folks will mow, and then in this instance, it's still establishing. And so we wanted to have a weeding event. So here this side is weeds and this side is dried basket flower with seed heads that'll get ground up into mulch and distributed back on the site. So at a smaller scale, like, 200 square feet in your front yard, you would, snap off all the dry stalks and go build a compost pile. And at the same time, you hoe the weeds out of there that shouldn't be in there. So this goes on during the first year of establishment, basically. So by the end of the warm season, you can see the grasses have come on in that same area that was covered with bluebonnets. And so now you have to go be the buffalo again and make room for the bluebonnets. So we'll just deadhead all that grass. Some folks will do this in springtime after it's good and dry like this. And so then once you've cut the grasses back, that's how it should look. And in here, this is all wildflowers growing in and amongst little blue stem and other prairie grasses. And so you can see, like, if you do this early enough in the winter, that the wildflowers can get very robust. And then the whole cycle repeats itself. But you can see after year one, it's, fully robust. And then, maintenance is just an ongoing version of this. And basically where, you're paying attention and you're stepping up your plant ID game, where you can catch things earlier and earlier and earlier in their growth cycle, and that you have strategies to deal with particularly aggressive and invasive things, so that they don't get out of hand and reproduce and dump a bunch of seed all over you and make the problem worse next year. So a stitch in time saves nine. And everybody's place is going to be different. Every ecoregion is going to be different about what are, the really invasive plants. Y'all will have this one where you're at. You'll have this one where you're at. You'll have this one where you're at. You'll have Johnson grass where you're at. And unfortunately, society doesn't value all people the same, and society doesn't value all work the same. These gentlemen here know more about native plants than probably 99% of the population of Texas. And some of them only went to the 3rd grade, and unfortunately society doesn't at this point value that. I think as we progress and learn more about living within our means, people that have this skill set will be valued. But you need someone, landscapes need someone who knows, that know about the plants and that have the physical ability to take action, to be the buffalo. Because sometimes it's really bad, And unfortunately, since I'm on the commercial side of things, like, I see a lot of bad stuff. So chemicals can be quite effective. However, they're not near as delicate as a set of human hands. And, so this is cheatgrass again here, brome grass, rescue grass, and a newly planted restoration project, that this was dormant in a seed bank and nobody knew it. Prepped the site, killed off the warm season stuff, went and planted all the seed, and lo and behold, got a super stand of cheatgrass. Applied a selective chemical that cheatgrass is on the label that won't impact native grasses because they were still green and actively growing when we applied the chemical, and we applied it when we did because we did not want that grass to head out and load up the seed bank again. So you can see the herbicide was very effective. However, there's no free lunch. So you can see here the Monarda lemon mint is totally unaffected. The Gaillardia is totally unaffected, but the bluebonnets are sick. So there's no free lunch with chemicals. But anyway, the silver lining, you always gotta look for the silver lining, is that man, native plants totally belong in our landscapes, and we're collectively, through the hard work of folks like NIPSOT and organizations like Native American Seed, we're turning the tide, and we're putting it out there in the world for people to see, and it's working. 25 years ago, the level of acceptance and knowledge out there was nothing like it is today. So I'm sure y'all are experiencing the same thing. And for us, it's translated into, massive growth in our company. And I would hope that it's translated to massive growth in your organization. So, and lastly, we can't be in these landscapes all the time to engage the passersby. I cannot convey how important interpretive signage is. So especially when you're working like in the DFW area, man, like it's so outside the mainstream still that, people need help to understand that these landscapes are okay, because they're a lot of fun, they're cool. And with that, I'll do questions if y'all have any. Let me stop sharing my screen. Y'all just want me to answer the questions out of the chat? Okay.
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me still?
All right. If I take it off mute, if I take it off mute, that'll help the process. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This audio. So anyway, John, I think it was John who had asked the question about getting rid of Bermuda, and how do you handle it over, that year time when you're dealing with erosion?
Yeah, Bermuda, I mean, okay, so an individual person has to take they have to make a decision if they want to try and tackle the Bermuda grass, and they have to decide, am I going to do this with or without herbicide? Right? And that's an individual choice. So, basically it's a broadcast treatment, either with mechanical means or solarization or herbicide first to try and wipe out 95% of it. And then in the establishment period, you have to be on it and you have to ID it and you have to kill it as soon as it pops up. And if you're using chemicals, you'll need to replant everywhere you've sprayed. And if you're digging it up, you'll need to do the same. But you have to work on it during that establishment period, so that, because it won't take over native areas, it just, if it's establishing along with the native areas, it takes hold, right? And expands to its limits until the native plants at the edges are big enough to keep it in its place. So
Okay. There was another question about, when you showed the tractor and tilling the soil, about, is there a problem with the tractor recompacting the soil?
well, so there's a lot of math here. Okay, so if you look at that vehicle, it has very wide tracks on it, right? And those tracks help distribute the weight of that machine. So the tracks are very wide, but they're also very long. And so when you go look at the pounds per square inch that is being applied to the soil, it's about the same as like a golf cart. Now, another tractor, if you're pulling the implement behind the tractor, you can have a tractor with, regular tractor tires, and then it rips the soil out. But in the act of applying seeds, guess what? We're going to drive over it again. because that's what happens. You know, the buffaloes wallow up the ground, the seeds will all fall on the ground, and they'll, you know, stampede over it and pack them back in there. So the thing is it's the deeper compaction is what the steel is all about, is to fracture those lower layers so that the roots have somewhere to grow.
Okay.
Because it's just
Another
like,
question.
go ahead.
I said another question about who do you feel are the professional leaders in ecological design in Texas, and what are some of the top projects in the state that we could attempt to model on a smaller scale?
Yeah, so there's a lot of folks in the landscape architect industry that are doing their darndest to incorporate this stuff like into corporate campuses and larger scale, highly visible public projects. Texas Parks and Wildlife is trying their best to, you know, incorporate native plants into their, you know, facilities and into their lands that they manage. Uh, you know, our company. And then there are numerous kind of individual people out there. You can find them on YouTube and stuff that are, you know, they produce some really good how-tos and, you know, ways to think. And you know, it's not a very big field, like, you know, professionally speaking, about people that are the, you know, the go-to, how do you, you know, build a 100% native thing. But many of the folks that are doing, you know, large scale projects are designing native components into them.
Okay. And then question regarding KR blue stem control when neighboring properties are also a monoculture.
Right. So my suggestion is that you make a pot of iced tea and carry it on over to your neighbor and ask if you can sit down and have a conversation. And ask them, you know, hey, explain what you're trying to do, and explain how, you know, the KR blue stem seed production is a problem. What I see happen a lot is that folks will mow that KR and it's mixed in with little blue stem, and they'll go mow it too early, you know, and just kill the little blue stem seed production. Then the KR will rebloom and reseed the area, you know. So it's like a sculptural thing where you take those seed heads off of there. Now, controlling KR is a whole other deal. Like it's a multi-year endeavor where you have to kill the mama plants off and exhaust the seed bank of KR blue stem, and to the point where you can get 85% native stand established. And then it's selective treatments or prescribed fire in the heat of the summer really knocks KR back, but doesn't impact little blue stem near as bad. So that one's a daunting challenge. And you know, you really want to consult with someone who knows what they're doing if you're trying to do anything with KR at scale.
Okay. Another question was on thunder turf. That Lori says that I spread out thunder turf last late October, early November. I'm thinking this was too late. Will it still come up, or should I reseed now?
Yeah, you just want to take a wait and see approach. October is definitely like pushing it, you know. September, you can still get that 35 days of warm weather to get it up. You should have experienced a little bit of germination in early October, late October, just depends on the year. November is definitely too cold. Those seeds should not have perished. They should still be viable. They should still be there. The question is there still an open canopy for them to thrive, or is it covered in weeds, you know? And you'd be amazed if you get down on your hands and knees what you can learn. Like, go find a buffalo grass seed, you know. They'll be there still. Remember that the slide I showed of what the seeds look like while they're on the ground? That's how close you need to be. And if, you know, by June or July it's just obvious that this is a dead bear patch, then yeah, go for it.
Okay. And a question about, have you had success with solarizing with cardboard at school habitat sites?
Yeah, so that's an ideal place to do that. You just want to be sure that it's covered for some portion of the growing season. So perhaps like, the you have you're working with, say, the kids in the fourth grade, and you have a fifth grade class next year that they're going to be in, and you're working with that teacher so that they can start the process in spring, solarize the area so it stays covered all summer long, and then in the fall you pull it off and add compost and add seeds, and then come the following spring you can see the results of your work. Solarizing Bermuda over the winter doesn't seem to do quite as well, and the not ladybird, sorry. There's a really cool garden center in Austin called The Natural Gardener. So you can go on their website and they have some PDFs about sheet mulching is what they use to deal with Bermuda grass. So this is not something that you would necessarily use for with seeds. It'd be more for like if you're going to install live plants and you have an area that's covered in Bermuda grass, you just layer, uh, cardboard, compost, cardboard, compost, cardboard, compost, cardboard, compost. You make it so dense and so thick that the Bermuda grass can't make it through there, and it'll perish. And after the same kind of deal over a growing season, then you can dig a hole in that stuff and put your native plant and cover the whole thing with bark mulch, and you can have native plants that way.
Okay. Questions here in McKinney? Amy?
Some herbicide questions. Controlling nut sedge. What do you find more effective? Have you found Mazepin to be better, or I've had some pretty good luck with Sulfuron, but getting a good.
Wait, Amy, you may should come here and ask that, because I'm not gonna be able to repeat
Is
those.
she asking about Johnson? Are you asking
Did you
about
hear
Johnson?
that question?
Yeah, kind of. Are you asking about Johnson grass?
No.
Nutgrass.
Nutgrass, yeah. Certainty seems to work well. So that would be your sulfuron.
Sulfuron. I've used that pretty well.
Yeah, so that, and then there's another one called sedge hammer.
Yeah.
When you have problem things
Tell us
like this,
about
you want to take really good notes about what you're doing. And then you want to, take really good observations about what the outcome was. And if you can, you always want some kind of control area, right? So that you can gauge the efficacy of certain things. And sometimes certain biotypes, certain geographical locations, the populations are more sensitive to one chemical pathway than they are to the other. So if you can experiment around with some of the other things out there, like sedge hammer or whatever, and you can tell the difference. But yes, that certainty, that's the stuff we used on. So it works on the cheatgrass, it works on nutgrass, and it works on Johnson grass, but it kills sunflowers. So, it kills bluebonnets. So, there's no free lunch, but sometimes, man, especially like if you're somebody like me and you get called in to do 400 acres, you think I'm going to go roll out 400 acres of black plastic.
Right. What could I ask you one more? What about have you had much luck with anything with some of the camelinas, the Asian camelinas, the either the Bengal or the Asiatic dayflowers, communists, or any of those?
Yeah, I
I've
mean,
been
it's so dry. It's so dry here in Junction that we, one patch of that stuff, and it's like under the mesquites at the end of the field, and it's not bothersome to us. Typically you can type in that to Google and then type in the word control, and then you'll find something, where somebody's talking about it. I would suspect that you're going to need some kind of broadleaf selective chemical, and you need to be real careful here because a lot of them are like real volatile and will, especially if you apply them in the heat, the vapors will kill trees and stuff around. And many of them are very persistent in the environment. So in that regard, we use like a low volatile esters solutions of 2,4-D or esters of remedy or whatever. I think, if you're trying to select it out of something, in general, when you find that stuff, it is a monoculture, and just, a 3 to 5% solution of Roundup would probably wipe it out.
Well, no. I was going to tell you right now, no. I've worked on that pretty heavily for a long time, and I've poured over through several versions of Weed Science journal and several more, and I was just hoping maybe you could come up with something there.
Yeah,
The professional field of the
yeah. So
journals of ag science, they're having a hard time with it.
a lot of the stuff I work on is not on these labels. I have to work it out. Like, okay,
Yeah.
that genus, this genus. Listen, for stuff like that, we'll use a combination of
That's a
triclopyr.
cocktail.
Yeah, triclopyr and 2,4-D, low volatile esters of 2,4-D.
I'm gonna try doing it. I'm gonna hit it with triclopyr, and then I was gonna follow up. I was gonna give it a few days, and then I was gonna follow up actually with glyphosate with a pretty high dose of a pretty
Yeah, I mean,
concentration of glyphosate.
sometimes like when we're blanking out a spot and it's got all kinds of stuff like that, we'll mix all three of those together.
Yeah, we've done that before, and nothing
Kill-
blew up. We got
Yeah,
rid of it.
kills all is what we call it. Kills all.
Oh, yeah, I got killed off. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hope everybody.
It's- Yeah. All right. Well, George, thank you very much. That's all our questions. I don't know.
Okay,
Rodney,
well,
did you-
thank you all so much for having me. Please have us back.
anything else?
Let us know if we can do anything for you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, George. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a good night.